While doom scrolling on Twitter recently, I came across some heated debates, as is natural on Twitter, regarding Payal Kapadia's debut feature, All We Imagine Is Light. To those of you who've been sleeping under a rock until now, here's a bit of a recap. FTII alum Payal Kapadia's All We Imagine Is Light premiered at the 2024 Cannes Film Festival, where it picked up the Grand Prix award, essentially proclaiming it to be the second best film of the year after Anora. This film was the first Indian film to be played in competition at Cannes in 30 years. Since then, it has picked up numerous accolades, winning Best International Film at the Gotham Awards, New York Film Critics Circle, Chicago Film Critics Association, and more, including a Best Director nomination for Kapadia at the Golden Globes. Despite of this success, it was passed up by the Film Federation of India when it came to making a selection for the Oscars in favor of the more commercial Lapata Ladies. With its successful run, many were hopeful it might translate into a Best Picture nomination for it at the Academy Awards, which unfortunately did not materialize. However, it did make the shortlist. In the citation put out by the Film Federation of India regarding its selection of Lapata Ladies over All We Imagine Is Light, they said that Lapata Lady was a story that can simultaneously be seen as one that needs change and one that can bring about change. Lapata Ladies is a film that can engage, entertain, and make sense not just to women in India, but universally as well. In follow-up interviews with the jury members, they were repeatedly called out on why they had not picked All We Imagine Is Light. FFI President Ravi Kotarakara told The Hollywood Reporter India, "The jury said that they were watching a European film taking place in India, not an Indian film taking place in India." These interviews did not clarify what the committee actually meant by this critique, if it even is a critique. What is it about Lapata Ladies that makes it decidedly more Indian than All We Imagine Is Light? Does it not qualify as an Indian film simply by virtue of it being a film that takes place in India, directed by an Indian woman? What are these arbitrary parameters that Payal Kapadia's film fails to meet? Perhaps it's just the unadulterated depiction of social struggles in All We Imagine Is Light that the jury objects to. Indian mainstream cinema, with its penchant for escapism, frequently sanitizes its stories and its characters for mass appeal. In an environment like this, a film like this is a major disruption, and it being a French, Netherlands, Luxembourg, India co-production makes it easy to dismiss it as a foreign product. While Lapata Ladies explores gender inequality in India, it neatly wraps it up into a feel-good story where the problems come to be attributed more to individuals than a rotten culture. This is not to say that Lapata Ladies is not an excellent film, which it definitely is in my opinion, but All We Imagine Is Light depicts the fraught reality of living in Mumbai with a lot more restraint. The story of two nurses, Anu and Prabha, and the cook at their hospital, Parvati, deal with urban isolation, class inequality, religious differences, and more. However, unlike Lapata Ladies, these women do not care for revolution or big speeches. They try their best to live their simple lives. The film rejects traditional plots for a more poetic approach. If you're not new to my channel, you might have seen me previously cover this exact fallacy in my video on Satyajit Ray and Raj Kapoor. In the video, I elaborate on the myth of authenticity, especially in a modern, globalized world. In my opinion, to hold on to this rigid idea of Indianness is a regressive ideology. False notions of purity are antithetical to any real development in our cinema. Must we be bound by the aesthetics of the masala fixture? Does a film simply by taking a more realistic and sensitive approach hold the Western gaze? To dissect this question further, I want to take a look at Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire, the contentious Best Picture winner at the 2009 Academy Awards. The story of slum dweller Jamal and his triumphant run in an Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, who after being accused of cheating, narrates his story, and through various flashbacks we come to learn about his extraordinary life that taught him the answers he needed to win. Critics and audiences were split on their opinion of this film, with many lauding it for its audacious realism, while many labeled it as poverty porn. Dorton lays out poverty porn as the tactics of media sensationalism through the sharing of images that highlight human suffering and weakness. According to Sony Jalarajan, Poverty porn representations narrow the boundaries between myth and reality to present facts as emotional reality. The shocking and pervasive images of the victims are ubiquitous in visual media formats as they find news value and political significance. They are used as a form of rhetoric to maintain the status quo of power relations. The way poverty porn is portrayed as an Asian phenomenon through media framing and agenda setting dismisses the universality of human misery by restricting it to regional contexts only. Upon the release of Slumdog Millionaire in 2009, Amitabh Bachchan wrote on his blog, "If Slumdog Millionaire projects India as a third world, dirty, underbelly developing nation and causes pain and disgust among nationalists and patriots, let it be known that a murky underbelly exists and thrives even in the most developed nations." Nicholas Almeida, a social activist, led protests against the labeling of slum dwellers as slumdogs. They protested outside the residence of Anil Kapoor, who plays the villainous game show host in the film. They held up banners that read, "Poverty for sale" and "I am not a dog." Tapeshwar Vishwakarma, an activist, filed a lawsuit against the composer A.R. Rahman and Anil Kapoor for depicting slum dwellers in a bad light and violating their human rights. Shamal Sengupta from the Whistling Woods International Institute in Mumbai, a reputed film school, called the film a white man's imagined India and a poverty tour. Firstly, in my opinion, the label slumdog is reflective more of the label put onto slum dwellers by society rather than the filmmakers themselves, making it an apt title for what the film is trying to say, or at least an inoffensive one. Now, looking at the actual content of the film, we must note that this film is based on a novel, Q&A by Vikas Swarup, who is an Indian diplomat, which must poke doubt into the argument that this is a white man's imagined India. Alvaro Vargas Llosa offers that the charge that Slumdog Millionaire exploits Mumbai's poverty is so absurd that by the same token, Charles Dickens' entire body of work would have to be invalidated as a defamation of 19th century England. I believe there is some merit to both sides of the argument here. I do not agree that we must take arms against Slumdog Millionaire simply because of its portrayal of abjection in India. However, it is the form in which it is portrayed that is in need of scrutiny. Georgia Christindis argues that Slumdog Millionaire turns poverty from a political problem into an ontological one. Mithu Sengupta argues that the film systematically denies the economic productivity of slum dwellers. In this world, the futility of such efforts is implicit in the claim that Jamal's success is his destiny. Furthermore, Christindis contends, while Slumdog Millionaire promises that it could be you who succeeds, it also both enacts and asserts the fact that not everyone can capitalize on their resources to escape from poverty, and that if it is not you, there is no alternative, no way to challenge the structures that cause poverty. Snehal Shingavi summarizes, the ideological frame through which people like Danny Boyle and Vikas Swarup view the very poor in India is itself cleft between an ideology of hope and hopelessness, between ideas of philanthropy and nihilism, whose contradictions produce the dizzying shuttling between realism and romance that characterizes both narratives. Both the film and the novel are structured simultaneously as exposé and as fantasy, because of the features of neoliberal capitalist development globally, which have preserved intact critiques of uneven development patterns at the same time as they have led to the conclusion that little can be done to alter those patterns. In Danny Boyle's own words, it's an entertainment in the end. It's not a documentary. Therefore, Slumdog Millionaire performs a dual function, simultaneously appeasing the Western bourgeois' cravings for realism and immediately pacifying them with the belief that poverty, as Christindis puts it, is an ontological problem, or worse, simply a skill issue. Dennis Lim notes this tendency to have its cake and eat it too. The film has it both ways. It makes a show of being anchored in a real-world social context, then asks to be read as fantasy. From these discussions, if we are to take the tenets of poverty porn as such, transgressive visuals of extreme suffering brought on by economic conditions, where poverty and the conditions brought on by it are turned into spectacle, transgressive for the sake of transgression, and empty of political implications. a restrictive view where the problems faced by the character are restricted to region or individual culpability. I do not believe that these will be found in All We Imagine Is Light. A reading of this movie as poverty porn is irresponsible and reductive, as a so-called suffering of the characters is never sensationalized or blown out of proportion. The mistake here is to conflate any depiction of economic struggle with poverty porn. To the middle to upper class jingoistic nationalists concerned with the image of India far more than the condition of India, bear in mind that Kapadia depicts her characters with acute sensitivity and grace, with interiority. If anything, All We Imagine Is Light is the answer to poverty porn. While taking a restrained approach, Kapadia's film is still infused with socio-political commentary. In an interview with Asia Society New York, she discussed the extreme inequality that exists in India and how it continues to grow as areas are increasingly gentrified. She says her approach was to always maintain these layers of classes within this film, something apparent in the scene between Parvati and the lawyer. The lawyer, while sympathetic, displays a misplaced, benevolent attitude. Kapadia insists that it is only through the union that her character had any hope for justice. She discusses her research into the cotton mills area, where migrants from Ratnagiri lived before being displaced when their land was sold to bigger developers, conducting interviews and attending union meetings, and even discussing the script with members. She also asserts that Parvati's story is inspired from the recently passed Citizenship Amendment Act, an exclusionary act that grants citizenship to Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, etc., fleeing persecution in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, leaving out those fleeing non-Muslim countries such as Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka or Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar. Additionally, this law, coupled with the National Register of Citizens, could render the country's Muslims stateless.
Besides being strongly an Islamophobic law, it was also an anti-poor law because nobody has papers in India. It's a real issue.
Parvati in this film faces a similar fate, how her history is effectively erased from existence because of a lack of documentation, a condition faced by a majority of Indians. Manola Dargis, in her review for the New York Times, wrote, "All We Imagine Is Light is a drama about life's fragility, but it's also about nurturance. Kapadia's three women have troubles, but she isn't asking for your pity, and she doesn't sweeten their difficulties to make them more palatable for your sensitivities. Instead, she is offering you the gift of three lives that may seem altogether different from your own, but are also, and finally, transcendently familiar." The difference between a film like Slumdog Millionaire and All We Imagine Is Light should be glaringly obvious. While one makes poverty a spectacle, the other contends with it. It does so with a quiet boldness, asserting the humanity of its characters, not allowing them to be defined by their conditions. While Slumdog Millionaire acts as a showpiece, a sort of ethnographic piece, clear in its attempt to Indianize itself through its attempts to Bollywoodize the stories, through its melodramatic mise-en-scène, its incorporation of song and dance, and its ultimate feel-good factor, All We Imagine Is Light pushes against the conventions of the mainstream to deliver a poignant story of desire in a harsh world, and challenges the socio-political structures that oppress these women. While Kapadia's film is inspired by the stories of the reality of living in Mumbai, through interviews and collaborations, Vikas Swaroop admits to having never visited Dharavi, instead saying that Google took him where he needed to go, allowing him to write the book in 2 weeks. For the argument that it is only films depicting poverty that receive international acclaim, I believe there is some truth to this argument. A vision of the global south as inferior reaffirms stereotypes. However, you take a film such as Girls Will Be Girls, for instance, which also released this year and also stars Kani Kusriti. This film deals only with the relationship between a mother and her daughter, a perfectly simple middle-class story where economic suffering is not presented as an obstacle. A beautiful film that did garner international acclaim, winning the World Cinema Dramatic Audience Award at Sundance, as well as an acting award for Preeti Panigrahi, and a Breakthrough Director nomination at Gotham Independent Film Awards. To me, Girls Will Be Girls stands as proof that what the world seeks at the end of the day is powerful and sensitive storytelling. I firmly believe that All We Imagine Is Light getting the global recognition that it is getting is a productive thing for our cinema. It expands on the idea of what an Indian film can be. For years now, we've gotten the reputation of being loud for loud's sake, for outrageous sensationalism. Here's a chance for us to showcase our humanity, for the world to take us seriously and less as a circus. Within the industry, it stands as proof that a different kind of cinema can work with critics and audiences. This film is bold because it is tender, it is challenging, and does not offer false consolation or redemption. We can cry about the Western gaze all we like, but at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves if we have a fantasy problem. This is a problem not unique to India but the world as a whole, but for the purposes of this essay, I will restrict this to India. Look at the mainstream Hindi cinema right now. Rocky Aur Rani, Kalki, Stree 2, Baby John, Emergency. I mean, our cinema is utterly detached from reality. It's either filled with fantasy or propaganda. This is not to say that such fantasies don't play an important role. They definitely do, but there's a point at which we can have too much of a good thing. All one has to do is take a look outside. Income inequality today is higher than during the British Raj. The secular fabric of our country is under threat as communal violence increased by 84% in 2024 compared to 2023. 90 rapes a day were reported in India in 2022. Caste-based discrimination and violence is rapidly escalating once again, and freedom of expression seems to be non-existent with the persecution of Rahul Gandhi, the Editors Guild of India, Arundhati Roy, Teesta Setalvad, the BBC, and more. What made films so special, particularly in the early days with the advent of sound, was that it was the first time in history we could see humanity reflected back at us and painted a living, breathing picture of ourselves. All We Imagine Is Light, and films like it are important so we can see that reflection of reality and face the world we live in. This film brings us back down to earth, not to make us feel despondent, but to see the humanity that resides in each one of us, the desires that we harbor, and ultimately makes for a more empathetic society. Something that India desperately needs today.